According to reviews, the play The Shadow Factory unearths a fascinating piece of local history which is both entertaining and educational. But many in the audience may not realize that the story of chaos, courage, and community spirit which emerges glosses over a controversy that has surrounded the response to Southampton to the Blitz since 1940. Depending on your point of view, the best person to analyze these circumstances is Emeritus Professor of Modern History at Southampton University, Adrian Smith. He states civic memorialization of the Blitz can in rare instances provoke controversy and debate, but in most urban communities, commemoration reflects the powerful set of images which every generation since 1945 has drawn upon. Yet remarkable displays of fortitude and forbearance often camouflaged avoidable acts of incompetence and inefficiency, with the passage of time ensuring the latter are erased from the dominant narrative. So does the Shadow Factory reflect the truth of the conflict at the time, or does it fall into the category which Angus Calder in his book of the same name labelled the myth of the Blitz? And does the audience really care? To begin with, the title of the play is wrong. The play is set against the background of Woolston's Supermarine Spitfire factory at Southampton. Following the attacks of the 24th and 26th of September 1940, Lord Beaverbrook ordered Supermarine to abandon the works, and production of the fighter plane was transferred to numerous venues, including Lowther's Garage, the Sunlight Laundry, and Hanson Dorset Bus Depot. But these were dispersal, not shadow factories. The shadow factory at the time was Castle Bromwich in the West Midlands, which was to take over full-scale production of the Spitfire, although it was not until June 1940 that it managed to deliver a complete aircraft, and during this crucial period of the Battle of Britain, it was Southampton alone that supplied the RAF. Much of the discussion surrounding the civil response tends to sound like he said, she said. The point of dispute is represented by the comments made by the Bishop of Winchester, who, after making a tour of the town's parishes in December 1940, stated that Southampton was broken in spirit and that morale has collapsed, and everywhere there was fear. This view was supported at the time by the newly formed Government Mass Observation Unit, which was a key source of knowledge for the Ministry of Information. The view that the strongest feeling in Southampton is that Southampton is finished was reinforced by Wing Commander Hodsall, who was sent by the government because of the concern about the effect of the bombing on the civilian population.
Now the beast of war had given his command, and the skies over England rang to the echo with the thundering hoofbeats of the apocalyptic horsemen. With unparalleled fury, the Luftwaffe attacked. Death and devastation were everywhere. At Southampton, the dock employees worked with a frenzied energy to avert total disaster threatened by the destruction of their ARP control. Direct hits on a flour mill and a cold storage depot proved catastrophic. The ensuing fire burned for weeks, consuming a month's rations of meat and fat for the whole of southern England. The firemen's vain attempts to save them were seriously hampered by a sea of molten butter, which spread ankle-deep all over the dock area, rendering the drains useless. The heat of the fires raging was so great that much of the water from the hoses turned to steam before it reached the actual fire. When at last they did subside, the ruined shells of warehouses, offices, and rolling stock remained everywhere. Yet another victim of Nazi villainy had been sacrificed.
A major bone of contention to this day is trekking, as featured in the play. Mass Observation reported that the destruction caused by the Blitz made people feel that the only thing they could do was get out of the place altogether. In the Shadow Factory, this is falsely portrayed as families seeking temporary refuge by camping on the town common, whereas in reality in Southampton, trekking meant seeking sanctuary in the nearby countryside, which became a way of life. It is impossible to imagine how we would react in the same circumstances. But the yardstick by which the phenomenon was measured at the time by the rest of society was the royal family, who were encouraged to see out the war in Canada, yet instead elected to stay and revelled at the bombing of their own home, Buckingham Palace. It is this memory and the images of the royal family touring the bombed craters of the East End of London against which the view of trekking in Southampton is still measured and contested. But the Bishop of Winchester was not alone in his view of Southampton. At the time, German High Command made great propaganda value from the destruction of Southampton. There were reports that the glow of the firestorm of Southampton burning could be seen from as far away as Cherbourg on the coast of France, and the press in the United States reported claims that the city was a smoking ruin. Retrospective views tend to suggest that even if there was a prevailing sense of Southampton being finished, the same did not necessarily apply to many local residents, even those keenest to seek shelter in the surrounding countryside. Nevertheless, when the fairly general view that Southampton was done for finally received publicity in February 1973 from a South Coast reporter, it was rubbished by the Southern Daily Echo as a slander on the town. It was the introduction of the United States to World War II that saw a real change in the fortunes of the port of Southampton. When searching for a base in the UK, the US were offered Southampton, not because it was a thriving commercial enterprise, but because even the British High Command had consigned the town to the dustbin of history.
In this dark hour of Britain's need, a strong and friendly hand helped her to regain a vantage point from which the future could be regarded with a greater degree of confidence. America began to send over quantities of commodities necessary for the well-being of our peoples and for the effective maintenance of our war effort. The dock's nerve centers twanged with a transatlantic hum, its pulses quickened, and in a short time, Leithland was in full flood. The United States undoubtedly meant business. The dark, swinging silhouettes of Southampton's cranes wove a crazy rhythmic pattern in the sky as they delved into country's holds, bit hungrily into the teeming supplies, and reared again with the life-giving fruits of Anglo-American cooperation hanging pendant in their steely jaws. It was an inspiring sight. For 2 years, Southampton dealt with this huge traffic, both at the quaysides and on the rails as well. In time, the nature of the American shipments changed to something clearly indicative of preparation. Preparation for D-Day. England was now well populated with hordes of husky young Yanks. With them came their engines of war in staggering quantities. Southampton's quays and sheds were crammed with discharged cargoes, and all lines were cleared for this vast priority traffic. Other traffic, coal and such like, which had been growing in volume since the fall of France, was sent in coasters to other British ports. Vital supplies for the much-discussed Second Front continued to pour in from the other side of the Atlantic. To a Britain grim and sorely smarting with a sense of rebellion against the Nazi warlords, the apparently inexhaustible supply of American war power acted on the general morale with tonic effect. No longer was vague hope alone the booster of Britain's spirits. She had regained confidence, the confidence that one day democracy would triumph.
A fact that is not widely appreciated is that the port was so badly damaged by the Blitz that it was closed to all but essential traffic for 2 years before the arrival of the United States. Yet in the period up to D-Day, it was the 4th busiest in the world, with a ceremony to celebrate the millionth Yank embarking from the port. Despite these facts, there remains a residue of resentment amongst the population, because not only were American GIs overpaid and oversexed, they were also instrumental in putting Southampton back on its feet and giving the town a pivotal place in the history of Europe. Even to this day, when children in Southampton are asked the reason the build-up prior to D-Day was never discovered, they are told that it was because the army was hidden by the trees in the New Forest. Subsequently, alternative explanations are provided, such as the German High Command were deceived into thinking that the invasion would be at the Pas de Calais by the role played by double agents or the fake army in Kent. This may be true, but the underlying reason that the invasion was never expected via Southampton is because the German High Command believed its own propaganda. Southampton was finished in 1940. so there was no way an invasion fleet could be launched from the port. Such a suggestion would be treasonable. Once the assessment made by the Bishop of Winchester is accepted, the other pieces of history fall into place. Adrian Smith sees civic agencies as the guardian of truth, but until very recently there was no copy of the Hodsall Report in Southampton's main library, and the online history website maintained by the council has no record. There is still an ambivalence about this period in the history of Southampton. Adrian Smith largely blames the popular press and cites flagging circulation figures, prompting the local newspaper to run regular features promoting a positive narrative supported by amateur historians. It is in this vein that the Shadow Factory must be seen. The play is predicated on the idea that it was the community spirit that won the day, when in reality this was the single factor that made Southampton appear most vulnerable. The Shadow Factory has taken the greatest drawback at the time and made it the greatest attribute, turning historical fact on its head. The historians who are connected with the production are fully aware of the details of the controversy, and it is perverse for the Nuffield Foundation to profit in this way from the death and misery caused during the town's darkest hour. It is an insult to the courage and heroism of the citizens of Southampton that suffered to be remembered in a commercial production that is more akin, Daisy pulls it off, than The World at War. Unfortunately, when it is convenient, popular culture has the effect of displacing historical fact, and the alternate false narrative has a trick of suddenly becoming the orthodoxy. So should the audience care? History is to society as the memory is to the individual, and this false narrative perpetuates a view of the world in which alone we can overcome almost any extreme set of circumstances. In reality, Southampton was indeed able to rise like a phoenix from the ashes, but only with the help of friends and allies.
This is London. London calling in the home, overseas and European services of the BBC and through United Nations Radio Mediterranean. And this is John Snagg speaking. Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, have just issued communique number 1, and in a few seconds I will read it to you. Under the command of General Eisenhower, Allied naval forces, supported by strong air forces, began landing Allied armies this morning on the northern coast of France. I'll repeat that communique. Communique number 1. Under the command of General Eisenhower, Allied naval forces, supported by strong air forces, began landing Allied armies this morning on the northern coast of France.